Welcome back to my 2022 Exit Report series. This one's going to be a fun one because we're right in LA. Got Ted Sobel back here with Sports USA. We've known each other for just a few years, 50 or so, and he's covered the LA Rams a great deal. And he's probably got a lot to say about
Yes,
the LA
I
Rams
do.
2022, 2023, you name the year. Ted, how are you doing?
I'm great. Good to see you again, Ron. Let's have some fun today. The Rams are they're in flux. Let's put it that way. We don't have any idea what they're going to look like this next season. But if they listen to this podcast, maybe we'll help them out a little bit.
We'll give them a best try. You know how they always say there are 4 seasons back east, and even though LA is going through a little bit of snow, rain, hail, and stuff like that, the Rams went through 4 seasons in one season, it seems like that. If you look back 12 months ago, there was a ticker tape parade around this time in February. As
A
somebody
small
who's,
one.
if somebody who's covered them for so long, how did it feel for the Rams and for you finally bringing home the Super Bowl in Los Angeles?
Well, it was great. And, you're the second person in the last 24 hours who asked me, so what was it like covering the Super Bowl? I wasn't there. I was with you, if you remember.
Oh, yeah.
We watched the game on your TV, but, I work the 18 weeks of the regular season for Sports USA doing the pregame, postgame, and halftime stuff. That's enough. I didn't have to be at the Super Bowl. I'm good. I've been to several. I'm fine. It's a zoo. So it was good to be just relaxing in your place and watching the game. And I think that, the city has taken to them to a point, but it's not like it's Rams fever everywhere. I think it's still taken time since they left for St. Louis for a couple of decades. When you come back, it's not going to happen. I mean, there's a new generation of fans that they're trying to build on here. So it's going to take time. And, they're a little bit ahead of the game than the Chargers because the Chargers had never been here except for back in 1960. So it's going to be interesting to see how that fan base develops over the next 10 years or so.
Yeah, we'll find out whether or not we have fair weather fans, whether we have people who are going to work through the transition. And it is a transition because Las Vegas, Chris, yourself, everything we said over the summer and into the fall was this team really rented the Super Bowl in a way. And the 4 players that were instrumental, most of all, Von Miller, who averaged almost a sack a game when he came here, Sony Michel when Akers got hurt, obviously Odell Beckham, especially in the first half of the Super Bowl, but he was really coming on during the playoffs, and Eric Weddle, who had that key interception against San Francisco. And now, 12 months ago, they were all gone again. And here we go with free agency. They do get some veterans, Bobby Wagner for one, and Allen Robinson, who I was high on when they drafted him. Or when they signed him in free agency. But the draft itself, very uninspiring. Pick 104 was their very first pick. And we knew that was collateral for all the Stafford move and everything else. But how did you feel about the roster come draft time, April, May?
I didn't like it at all. I mean, to me, it wasn't as if it was going to make a huge difference in the season. I always talk about, and we discuss often, the importance of draft picks, but how many of them are actually as effective as they needed to be at that position for their rookie season? Not many on whatever your team is. So, it's a lot of times that's more for the long haul than it is, hey, we just filled a guy at the spot just for this year. So it didn't work out the way they wanted to in many ways. And, that's another thing we're going to talk about today is how that's going to affect the next draft. And I think one of the things that we should look at defensively right off the start, you already mentioned Bobby Wagner. He's going to be gone. All right. So that affects their run D immediately. And their run defense was outstanding for much of the year. I think they only had 1 week where they allowed, and it was late in the season when they had injuries, where they allowed 100-yard rusher all season. So it was really, really solid. But at the same time, Bobby Wagner's gone, and you go back-to-back years, key guys. Miller's gone one year, and now Bobby Wagner's gone the next. Those are huge shoes to fill. Even though they're up there in age, they still extremely effective. So now the question is, okay, what are you going to do from a defensive standpoint? Get maybe one more draft pick. My solution is, and I'm not the only one with this solution, you got to trade Jalen Ramsey for a first-round pick. Maybe get 2 picks if you're lucky. I don't know what the market would be, but that, to me, you would lower the salary cap for this next season by about 18.5 mil. You pick up some key draft choices or choice, and that's a good place to start as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and it all sounds logical, except for now we're talking about the Rams, and this would be a 180-degree departure from their draft philosophy. But that's a question that we're going to get into a little bit later on is, are we reloading, or now are we starting the rebuild process with a quarterback who's a little bit up there in age and has been injury prone? Now, coming into the year, we talked a lot about negatives, and these were my 3 keys. I'm going to read them off, and then you may add your own or comment on these. One of them was turnover spike. They had a plus ratio the previous year, but we've known in the past that Matthew Stafford has had some turnovers in bunches. We've also lost some key personnel who is, they have to incorporate a number 2 wide receiver. They lose Whitworth on the offensive line, which means pass protection might be a problem. He retires. They lose Eric Weddle, who in his short stay had an interception, that key interception, and so on. Would turnovers go the wrong way? Safety play was number 2 for me. The back end of their defense has generally allowed 2 out of every 3 passes to be complete over the last few years. That doesn't get it done unless you have a very efficient offense and run pass balance, which was my number 3 key. Akers came off the Achilles injury. He tried to come back. The entire run team did nothing in the Super Bowl run. Those playoff games, 2.7 yards per carry.
Yep.
When you're that one-dimensional and somehow you still run you're still able to win the Super Bowl. We know that they were dangerously close to not even making the playoffs, and then they end up in the Super Bowl, erasing that deficit to San Francisco. But unless you're Tom Brady or somebody like that, you really need more run pass balance. Those were my keys. Anything to add or talk about there?
Well, obviously the main thing that hurt them offensively this year was once they lost Cooper Kupp, it was just forget about the season. It's over.
Yeah.
All right. So you had a total bust in Allen Robinson. And then the rest of the guys, a guy that I thought they should have never gotten rid of, maybe if I recall, it was salary issues, was Robert Woods. I thought he was the perfect guy from a depth standpoint, but they gave up on him. They bring in Allen Robinson, so that's down the tubes. That was worthless. And so now you just hope that Cooper Kupp comes back healthy, which I assume he will. But you need some major depth there. They got some good tight ends. They're fine. But they need a couple of more receivers. And their running backs are not good. That's all there is to it. And then you add a below-average offensive line, okay? You got Havenstein has not worked out to their no boom as well. He went to left guard. I don't think that's going to work for the long haul. So they got some issues on all throughout the offense right now. And we don't even know if Matthew Stafford's going to be, he had the elbow issue. Is this now going to be a lingering thing with his age? Because I wouldn't expect him to be the same old, young Matthew Stafford anymore.
Yeah, we saw this. He had that undisclosed procedure, as they call it, in the offseason. You and I both know the Rams don't even dress their starters in August. This team still working off the laurels of winning the Super Bowl with an incomplete roster. I said season win decisions, and we talked about this before the season. This isn't breaking news, but this was fade all the way. My plan was a 2-to-1 fade ratio during the season. They opened at 11. They quickly went to 10.5. I went under 11, and I went under 10.5. Remember, their schedule bumped up a little too, not only with the AFC West, which was perceived to be really good, but their uncommon opponents that were not being played by San Francisco or by Arizona, who was a playoff team from the year before, or Seattle. where they played Green Bay, they played Dallas, they played Buffalo. I mean, those are teams that no one else played. And they had to play Buffalo week 1, who is far more prepared than the Rams. You
Well, we
lose
were
Whitworth.
prepared for that one too, weren't we?
Yeah, that was a big one. Now, they lose Whitworth, so they know the offensive line is trouble. Stafford hasn't even thrown the ball with his procedure and stuff like that. There's gaps everywhere on the team. Their record, which was 12-5, graded out closer to 10-7. If you take the people they lost and the bump up in the schedule, this to me was an 8.5 win team.
Okay, but I want you to admit to all of the viewers, Ron, that you did not bet under 6, though.
Under 6 wins?
Yeah, well,
no,
they were.
I did not bet under 6.
They were 5 and 12.
I did bet some alternate lines, but not with the Rams.
You would have got some pretty good numbers on that, baby.
Oh yeah. You know, it's funny because even after week 1, and this is an interesting thing that we talked about during the season, you could play season win totals during the year. They would just adjust the season win totals. And amazingly, after the Buffalo loss, the Rams still sat at 10.5 in some places. Now, a lot of people at the time said, oh, well, they lost to Buffalo. Of course, they're going to lose to Buffalo. But that game was rated a toss-up, and it was a loss. And it was also the way they lost and everything else that enabled some of us to play more money. Yeah. But still, they start 2-1. So everything seems okay. I'm going to point a scenario where it wasn't okay, but then they go into that standalone revenge. Another thing that we've talked about a lot. San Francisco, they lose that 10-point lead. Jimmy G is the quarterback now. It's not Trey Lance, which was big for me because I wanted that experience when they're going against the Rams. It's a Monday Night Football home game. It's a game that, to me, I'm looking at the line. The line was San Francisco -1.5. Now, in retrospect, that seems really crazy, but at the time, it seemed pretty crazy to me too. So then they fall to 2-2. But the problem is, Ted, how are you feeling after they had 1 day less to prepare and an uninspiring home game? They lost by double digits to Dallas week 5.
That was, again, a scheduling quirk that I know we talked about in the preseason. I mean, this is not something that was like over our heads. We saw this coming, and it was real obvious. You know, we talked about how they were probably going to be 0-1 against Buffalo. The Monday night game was really a pivotal game in their season. You know, you win that game, and you're in pretty good shape early on, even though we still question their roster. But that gets them into a whole different mindset. Now you got short week, Dallas, you lose, and then it's a downward spiral from there. And that was, it's sort of weird to say that week 5, but that was huge right there.
You know, it's funny because 2-3 for some teams, you say, okay, it's 2-3. We have 12 more games to go. But I looked at the numbers because I crossed over all my numbers after the 4th week, and I see, well, is it the same old Rams? Are they better? Are they worse? This is a team that had 50 or more sacks 4 seasons in a row, that had 10 at this point in the season, just 10. So they were averaging 2 a game. They let up 21 sacks in the first 5 weeks. To me, you cannot say it was the same old Rams. And then once Stanford got hurt, Cup got hurt, and who else got hurt?
They gave up.
Aaron Donald in the last 5 or 6 games. They did not have the people power to overcome that. And the metrics told us that the run game wasn't working either.
Yeah, and you know what? That's exactly when they needed a run game too. Because if you could grind it out, then you might be able to put yourself or keep yourself in ball games. Yeah. But they had nothing, and you couldn't rely on their quarterbacks. You know, the 2 no-name guys that were playing. I mean, it was literally just give up. It's a free fall. Let's get out of this season. We'll worry about it during the offseason. And that was way too early for a Super Bowl. I mean, this is the worst defending Super Bowl team in history when you think about it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to say something to you that I haven't said publicly. And it just goes to me shaking my head about the Rams' philosophy that we have to address, that you've already addressed in terms of trading Jalen Ramsey. But at the trade deadline, The Rams tried to trade for Brian Burns, a very good pass rusher out of Carolina, the same way they actually got Von Miller, but without the terrible stats that we saw this year.
Right.
They offered a number 1 in 2024, a number 1 in 2025, and quote unquote additional considerations.
Which
Somehow
means another number 1 somewhere.
It could have been players like the Russell Wilson trade. It could have been a
Yeah.
contingent number 3 or 4, whatever it was. Somehow Carolina turned it down, which might be a blessing in disguise. I'm telling you, I would have raked this team over the coals if they did that trade, because unlike 2021, it would not have worked.
Yeah, well, again, that's Les Snead. This is his philosophy. It's an interesting thing too. We don't talk about money very often when it comes to these kinds of issues like building teams and stuff. But let's not forget, okay? And I stressed this a few weeks ago, that Denver has Sean Payton, I think only because of the money, okay? It's an undisclosed contract. They have the richest owners in the history of team sports, the Denver Broncos. And you know who's right not too far behind them? The Rams. Okay. So so the Rams have the money. And that comes into play when you're worried about, obviously salary caps are one thing, but you don't think about losing money when you're a team like this. You're willing to spend it on whatever it takes. So that's a huge advantage for this team. We'll see what they can pull off, who's available, who's willing to go there for whatever the price is. I think that's part of the equation that we don't talk about enough. But no doubt the draft picks situation this year is huge. That's why I say get rid of Ramsey. The big problem there is we talk about the defensive backfield is lacking. They need more help. And now you're getting rid of their best guy just for draft picks. But he's also going to be 30 years old soon. So you got to look at that equation. And I think he becomes a free agent after this season as well. So now you might lose him for nothing. So that's part of that whole thing.
It's crazy because there are teams that have been willing to take one step back to take 2 steps forward. And this is where the Rams are right now. It's not just that they lost those 3 injured players. It's the stats that I mentioned. They allowed, I don't know if you know this, 59 sacks this season. That offensive line that has averaged allowing fewer than 30 sacks per year. Now, I know Stafford was hurt and they were using untested quarterbacks and stuff like that, but it's not like they had Stafford all 4 years either. They had Cooper Kupp, who is susceptible to some of the inside rush. They did use some of their backups 2 or 3 games in their Super Bowl run at the end of the year, too. If you're allowing 59 sacks, you have problems. You have offensive line problems. You have running back pass protection problems. You're still looking perhaps for a number 2 wide receiver. Maybe Allen Robinson works out because I was high on him. I'm not saying that was a mistake. When it was made, I was okay with it.
I was too, but it looks like a total flop now. So, I mean, you give him another shot, but are you already packing in this season from a thought of even being a Super Bowl contender? Because, even if they get everybody back who's healthy, all right, and you trade Jalen Ramsey, which I think they should do, all right, you got Bobby Wagner is gone, and now you got to rebuild the O-line, you got to rebuild the DBs. I don't know where they're going to be good enough to win. If they can be 500-ish, that's all you can expect.
Yeah, well, a team that ended up with 38 defensive sacks, which is average, but very low for them, I think they'll be okay. Donald will come back. They'll find some pass rushers. They may even maneuver a way to get a free agent in that area. The concern is still 67.4% in the pass D, so that never improved. It's weird in a way that you have a team like the Rams who pass rush so effectively. I mean, and still allow 2 out of every 3 completions. That there's a disconnect, I should say, with that, which means that you need somebody who's a little bit better in man coverage. Now, Jalen Ramsey's supposed to be that guy, and maybe he is locked down because he was rated in the top 15 in each of the 3 years he's been with the Rams. But what's happening at linebacker? What's happening when you're covering the tight ends? Something's missing.
Well, I got one name to drop And you probably know a lot more about him than I ever will. You know Michael Hoyt, a linebacker. It looks like Hecht. It's Hoecht, but it's
Okay.
pronounced Hoyt. Okay, he came on. I believe he had 4.5 sacks in the last 7 games. Okay, so he did very well. He's sort of surprise guy. They moved him around, and I'm wondering if that might be his new position and how that will affect what they do looking forward in the next few months. But he was really good, surprisingly so. So, but
Okay.
outside of that, I mean, they got some work to do because Bobby Wagner's gone. Now the question is, and you also lose a leader there too, by the way. You
Right.
know, a signal caller type leader that is like those guys are not very easily replaceable, as per Von Miller, as we know.
It's interesting because the Rams spend so much time drafting on day 3 each and every year because they don't have day 1 and day 2 drafts. This is where you have to draft and develop. Some teams like Seattle are really good at that. Some teams are not really good at that, and they're wasted picks. The Rams are somewhere in the middle overall, but they have a lot of people like the person you mentioned there, where they either were unsigned free agents and undrafted free agents and so on. But this is where their roster, if they want to not rebuild but reload, the teaching has to be there because we're talking about 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th round draft picks that are making up the core of their team right now.
Let's give a little credit to extremely important guy that's not mentioned enough in all of the organization from a public standpoint, and that's Raheem Morris. Okay, Raheem Morris, I don't know what you think of him as a defensive coordinator, but let's just say he's not only been successful, but he is a forgotten glue guy in the locker room. He is the most important coach on the roster with McVay that keeps it together. When Sean McVay loses it mentally and goes nuts on the sidelines, it is always Raheem Morris that keeps them together in the room and on the field. He's an important guy. Probably will get another shot as a head coach sometime. But this year, he continues to be their DC, and he's a huge part of this equation for them.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Got to have the players,
but the players, especially the younger players, they look up to these coaches and they look for verbal clues and, as far as body language clues, everything related to that. So it is a daily thing, something something we don't see on a daily basis unless you are in the locker room with them, which
I haven't been in a while, by the way.
So the Rams have very few draft choices again this year. So far, they have their 2024 and their 2025, so that's good. But Matthew Stafford, his draft choice goes to Detroit, which turns out to be the 6th overall pick. So they lose that one. Sony Michel, they lose the 4th round pick there. So they have a 2nd round pick, a 3rd round pick, and 6 picks overall. Not much you can do unless you say you trade for Jalen Ramsey. So what areas are you targeting? What are your top 2 areas that you might be targeting in the draft?
I got to go O-line. It's way too important. You tell us, what kind of receivers draft is this? Because we know last year was like one of the deepest in the history of the world. Now that can't be quite as deep anymore, right?
No, I mean, receivers are better schooled. Their receivers in general are better in college. They're getting trained better each and every year. But in terms of the last 5 years, this might be the weakest receiver draft, especially at the top.
Okay, so that's an issue. And I think we also brought up in the past, one of the reasons it was not just receivers, but the deepest draft ever for everything last year was because of the pandemic, right?
Absolutely. And this will be the last year coming out where some people got that extra eligibility where they stayed a little bit longer. The other ones that stayed are more in the red shirt kind of thing. They didn't get the start. I mean, you'll see a little trickle down with that, but this is the last of 3 years that it really impacts the draft.
Okay, so now the question is, who are the best guys available when they're picking? Now, forget the Jalen Rams, we don't know about a first round Rams. That doesn't even match in my brain. What can I tell you? Any season. So 2nd round, is there really an outstanding O-line? I'm going to grab him. I'm going to grab him now. I got to have it. Okay. And then I'm also looking DBs besides receivers. I got to have another really good DB, specifically if Jalen
Absolutely.
Ramsey is sent away. You got to build up immediately there. So those are my two immediate needs.
Okay, I see that as very appropriate because I know some teams, the Rams included, like to stock up and make a strength an even greater strength. Hence the Brian Burns thing, hence the Von Miller thing, and so on. They hope that that masks weaknesses in other parts of their lineup. Which, if you have an Aaron Darnold and a Von Miller, it can mask some deficiencies. But you really see those two areas, and I would agree there. I've got a question for you now. Where do you stand as far as what Matthew Stafford's value is to the organization in 2023?
It all depends on his health. If he's healthy, then they should be okay as long as he's always going to make that wow play and then, wow, what the hell did you do that play? That's Matthew Stafford's life. That's his career. So, but he's got to be healthy. I mean, if he doesn't have the strong arm anymore, they're in trouble. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do. Their backups are John Wolford and Bryce Perkins. These guys are just guys. So, I don't know if you can guarantee me that he comes into the season reasonably healthy and the elbow is not an issue, or is it going to be a wear and tear thing? As the season goes on, it's like we could be in trouble. They better get a substantial backup just in case, because, and I have no idea who's available at this point, but maybe you have some thoughts on that. They need a true NFL backup that they can say, if he comes in, we'll be okay for now.
Yeah, because if they are in contention, the drop off between Stafford, if he gets hurt, and the next guy is maybe enough to knock him out of contention. So,
exactly.
Yeah, almost every team needs two quarterbacks these days.
Right.
So, in terms of final comments, I want to focus on the division a little bit. Let's take Arizona out of the mix because they could have the number one pick in 2024.
Yeah.
I mean, they're on the trapdoor opened and they've got 2 feet in there. But Seattle has a wealth of draft capital thanks to the Russell Wilson trade, and boy, did they use it wisely last year. And San Francisco is interesting because we had this conversation a year ago. What does Trey Lance bring to the table? And that's why until he got hurt, it actually clarified things once Jimmy G was back in the line. But now they're going to try Trey Lance again, 2 meaningful starts in 4 years. So where do the Rams fit in the NFC West picture?
For me, I have no idea. I mean, it really comes down to Stafford health, and then what they do with those draft picks. Because if they don't shore up the O-line, it's not going to matter. They're not going to be good enough. He's going to get sacked. He's going to be on his ass half the year again. Okay, and if you don't add at least one more quality receiver, I mean, how are you going to be? He's going to have to get rid of the ball quicker, like a younger guy would, and not the older Stafford would. So they got some mate, and they don't have running backs either that are doing the job. So they got so many holes to fill. I think they should be thrilled with a 9-8 season. I'm serious.
Yeah. Well,
I mean,
9-8 could make the playoffs in the NFC if you look around the league with the quarterbacks.
Yeah, that's possible. It's really interesting too, though, to mention Sean McVay and the fact that there was maybe a question mark. Would he come back? Would he not come back? And he's back. If he ever picked a season not to come back, this would have been the one. It's like, hey, can I have a year off and I'll call you in 2 years and just see what you guys do? Because this is going to be a weird year to be the head coach and say, okay, I'm going to coach them up. You can't coach up a bunch of guys if they're not talented enough. And that's going to be it's going to be fascinating to see what they can do free agent wise. And if they can get 2 or 3 draft picks that can help them immediately, because if they don't, they're in big trouble.
They're going to get Logan Bruce back. He was their pick number 104, which was their first pick in the draft. He missed the entire season as a rookie. He's from Wisconsin. Usually that equates as a generalization to better run blocking, a guy from Wisconsin.
Go Badgers.
Go Badgers. So if that, anything would help. So they have somebody who's been in the system a year, just couldn't play.
Yeah.
But for me, my closing statement would really be, it's going to be interesting to see philosophically what the Rams are between now and September 1st.
Yeah, well, again, that's a Les Snead thing, okay? But he's got the backing of the owner to pretty much do whatever he wants, so that helps a lot. It's not like there's restrictions. No, you can't. Like the Raiders, they're restricted in many ways, that way. They don't have the money, but the Rams have all the money they need to deal with, separate from the salary cap. So now, what's the philosophy going to be? And if it's just trade away everything because we don't care, and we'll just pick and choose as we go along. We'll fill in this guy and this guy. Well, good luck finding more Von Millers out there. They're not just running around all over the place. And they did an incredible job 2 seasons back. But that Super Bowl is already, the Lombardi Trophy is already looking a little rusty. It's pretty new, So it's like, okay, what are you going to do? And if they don't change their philosophy, I don't know how they can turn this around in the next year or two. I just don't see it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating watch. I probably would put somewhere between 40 and 50% right now. Yes, make the playoffs.
Interesting. Not good if you're a Rams fan.
Flip a coin, almost 50% flip a coin. And it's mainly because they're not going to face a slew of fantastic quarterbacks in the NFC. That's just the bonus of being there. But free agency is going to be just crazy in terms of watching. I mean, the NFC South, NFC West, it's just going to be amazing.
Okay, now if you're a free agent, are you thinking, I want to go to the Rams? Now, a free agent who wants to win, not just for the money, but it's always mostly about the money. Are you want to go to the Rams now, or are you thinking, you know what? They're sort of in transition. I'm not so sure I want to go there, even though they got, it was only 10 minutes ago they won the Super Bowl, and Sean McVay's still 15 years old, and everybody thinks he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. So what are you thinking about that, right?
I'm thinking that they can make a pitch saying the NFC West is wide open. We can
That's
beat
a good
Trey
point.
Lance. We can beat Geno Smith. We can beat whatever Arizona trots out week 1. I think because they reside in that division, if they were bumping heads against Philly and Dallas, no, I wouldn't be running in to get there. And the New York Giants, for that matter, who's on an uptick. But this out west, what we've talked about, the Jalen Ramsey thing, it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
I think that's going to happen. I even though they don't like to make those trades, I think from a salary cap standpoint and their needs, I think they absolutely have to do it. Otherwise, they'll probably lose him the following year, and he's already getting up there in age anyway. So, and separate from that, you mentioned because of the NFC West, I'm thinking just the NFC, okay, by itself, that you're in the mix if you're a decent team. I think Philadelphia is dropping for sure. They've got like 15 or so free agents this year. They're not going to sign most of those guys. And there's some key guys they're going to lose. So they're including their O-line, which is their strength. So maybe the Rams can sign one of those guys, actually. I didn't even think about that. Why not? Right?
Yeah.
Well,
a mix of veterans and higher rated draft talent would go a long way. And Ted, I think we're going to be revisiting this come draft time and when those season win totals come out. Sometimes you got to act quickly when those win totals come out.
That's for sure. By the way, how would Lane Johnson look in a Rams jersey?
He would look good in a lot of jerseys. So
yeah, but the Rams
let
need
the
him
bidding
more than
begin.
Not for me, baby. That was fun. No, I think it's going to be. They're really one of the more interesting teams to watch because of where they were and who the hell knows where they're going.
Well, Philly's funny you should mention that because Philly will be one of the last 2 teams I do in the NFL exit report. This, Ted, was team number 27, I believe. So I've got 5 more to go. And Ted, you were a part of 2 of them, of course. So we pulled you out for the West Coast teams. Thanks, Ted, for doing this.
Appreciate it.
And thanks for everybody watching or who will be watching. And we'll be back with another team coming up tomorrow. Talk to you later.
Great.